Coming at you all the way live. It's Soundwaves. Today I interviewed returning guest Kelvin Martinez, psychotherapist and homeless activist, advocate. All in all, good dude. He is going to be more of a part of the show. Sometimes I feel like his outlook is maybe the soul of what I'm trying to do here, what we're trying to do here with Soundwaves. And when I had hit him up, about a week ago, and a lot of things hadn't happened. There hadn't been uprisings in Minneapolis. There hadn't been as many people murdered by the police. But the show I wanted to talk to him about was freedom. And I asked him, I said, what does freedom look like? And mainly it was a thought that was coming to me as I go to work every day and then live across. I work with the unhoused, and then I live directly across the street from such a large encampment. I was thinking the other day, what does freedom look like to a lot of these people? What does freedom look like to you? We've seen recently that for a lot of people, freedom looks like opening up a goddamn Applebee's. It looks like getting a haircut. I definitely don't think it's that simple. I think it's definitely more complex. As we saw armed protesters demanding the opening of the economy, the march to a lot of people's demise, which that is. We can juxtapose that to the response of people seeing their freedoms infringed upon once again, really feeling the weight of the government on their neck in a tyrannical sense with the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And let's not forget, it wasn't but 3 years ago? Philando Castile in Minnesota. I don't remember if that was St. Paul or Minneapolis as well. Was murdered by the police in front of his child and girlfriend. Literally for telling the officer, hey, when you pull me over, I just want you to know I have a permit to carry a firearm. So definitely, I've been thinking about the concept of freedom. I just finished Rob Larson, who's also soon to be a guest on this show, his book, Capitalism and Freedom. And I was just thinking about how capitalism really infringes on our freedoms. And there's been a quote that's been circulating around my social media feeds, and if you listen to the show, most likely your social media feeds as well. And it's a little bitty snippet of a Martin Luther King speech. And the speech is actually called The Other America. And we forget that towards the end of his life, there was a lot of, we say uprising now, but we were calling them riots then. And he was speaking about the frustration of a people that leads to these outbursts of rage. They definitely don't exist in a vacuum. It's not as simple. 1992 didn't happen just because Rodney King. It didn't even happen just because Rodney King and Natasha Harlins. There was decades of grief, of frustration, of oppression in South Central Los Angeles. In a lot of the documentaries I watch about the riots, they never really talk about what role neoliberalism played in the demise of that area. But I want to read from you Martin Luther King's speech, The Other America. I want to use as a title for my lecture tonight, The Other America. And I use this title because there are literally two Americas. Every city in our country has this kind of dualism, this schizophrenia, split at so many parts, and so every city ends up being two cities rather than one. There are two Americas. One America is beautiful for situation. In this America, millions of people have the milk of prosperity and the honey of equality flowing before them. This America is the habitat of millions of people who have food and material necessities for their bodies, culture, and education for their minds, freedom and human dignity for their spirits. In this America, children grow up in the sunlight of opportunity. But there is another America. This other America has a daily ugliness about it that transforms the buoyancy of hope into the fatigue of despair. In this other America, men walk the streets in search for jobs that do not exist. In this other America, millions of people are forced to live in distressing housing conditions. In this other America, thousands of young people are deprived of an opportunity to get an adequate education. Every year, thousands finish high school reading at a 7th, 8th, and sometimes 9th grade level. Not because they're dumb, not because they don't have the native intelligence, but because the schools are so inadequate, so overcrowded, so devoid of quality, so segregated, if you will, that the best in these minds can never come out. Probably the most critical problem in the other America is the economic problem. There are so many other people in the other America who can never make ends meet because their incomes are far too low, if they have incomes, and their jobs are so devoid of quality. And so, in this other America, unemployment is a reality. So the vast majority of Negroes in America find themselves perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. This has caused a great deal of bitterness. It has caused ache and anguish. These conditions are the things that cause individuals to feel that they have no other alternative than to engage in violent rebellions to get attention. And I must say tonight that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last 12 or 15 years. It has failed to hear the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear the large segments of white society. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice and humanity. We will never solve the problem of racism until there is a recognition of the fact that racism still stands at the center of so much of our nation, and we must see racism for what it is. It is the nymph of an inferior people. It is the notion that one group has all of the knowledge, all of the insights, all of the purity, all of the work, all of the dignity, and another group is worthless on a lower level of humanity, inferior. To put in philosophical language, racism is not based on some empirical generalization which, after some studies, would come to conclusion that these people are behind because of environmental conditions. Racism is based on an ontological affirmation. It is the notion that the very being of a people is inferior. And we've got to see that this still exists in American society. And until it is removed, There will be people walking the streets of life and living in their humble dwellings, feeling that they are nobody, feeling that they have no dignity, and feeling that they are not respected. The first thing that must be on the agenda of our nation is to get rid of racism. That was a big chunk of MLK's The Other America. So I'm not going to talk too much now. I'm going to get into the interview that I did with Kelvin Martinez. So check out that discussion. It was a great discussion. Once again, Kelvin's going to be part of the show a lot more. So here is our interview on what is freedom. Thank you very much. Hey! Coming at you live, Soundwaves. I'm just going to cut right to it. It's been a very traumatic time in the States and also for me in Latin America. The band Bitter Lake, this is called Bitter Lake Presents. We did a tour of Brazil. Specifically, we were in Sao Paulo for most of the time, super underground tour. And to see what's happening over there with COVID-19 and Jair Bolsonaro not taking it seriously enough. I think they had over 1,000 deaths the other day, hitting up our tour manager, good friend, sometimes bass player and brother, Wida. He said he's losing a lot of friends. So that's been rough, coupled with what's going on in Minnesota. They burnt down a police station, y'all. The riots got real. The uprising got real because of the murder of George Floyd. I wanted to, before all this happened, I had hit up a previous guest, Kelvin Martinez.
Hello.
And I asked him this question. I said, what does freedom look like? And I've said this before for first-time listeners. I work at one of the emergency shelters in Oakland, California. And I feel like a lot of the people that are there aren't free. And the emergency shelter is a hotel. There was no structural changes done to the hotel. And ultimately, there's not really that many rules. It isn't jail. And oftentimes, the residents, the guests, as we call them, treat it like jail. They can even call the front desk to get like toilet paper. Like it's so much still a hotel. I feel like there's something mental, maybe, where you're just trapped in this rut. And one image that's kind of seared into my brain of all that's happening is that image that they keep showing of that officer's neck on the gentleman, George Floyd. And to me, it's like, what a powerful metaphor for the state's neck, like a knee on the neck of Black, brown people, poor people in the protection of capital and rich people's property. So I'm going to move out of the way right now. And Kelvin, thank you again for coming on and talking to me.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Jason.
How do you feel about that question of freedom?
I think that, well, really I think personally, one of the key questions that I kind of try to keep in mind for myself. I've mentioned last time I was on, I'm a psychotherapist, and I practice in this theoretical orientation of existential psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
And with existentialism comes this question of confronting our freedom or lack thereof, and realizing that we have the opportunity to define that, to take up that mantle of freedom or not, or to find ourselves in fear and trembling in the midst of it. And so it is, I think, something I think about quite a bit, and I find it no less complex. I feel like I have no quick and dirty answers about what freedom is and what it looks like and how we grasp onto it and utilize it. And I have been thinking about since you reached out, and really, I mean, I think you reached out to me 5 or 6 days ago, and it feels like so much has happened.
So much has happened since I reached out to you.
Yeah. So I have been thinking about this conversation in the midst of all of these things going on in Minnesota. We've had protests and people killed and injured here in LA, and this question of freedom and what our relation to it is. And I think one of the reasons for me that it feels so complex is that I actually don't think that we have very much experience with freedom. Since the last time we talked, I think I might have mentioned hypernormalization, and then I just kept thinking about it, and I was like, I need to go rewatch this doc. For those listening, it's Hypernormalization by Adam Curtis. It's on YouTube for free, so check it out. But one of the main arguments there that he starts from the beginning and kind of weaves through in this very complex fashion is that politics are not determined. The decisions that are being made in the world are not determined by politics. They're not determined by the people that we're electing in office. They're determined by the market. They're determined by economic forces. And it starts with this scene where in the 70s where New York has taken on all this debt, and they're trying to take on more debt from these banks, and the banks just don't show up, basically showing off how much power they have and saying, we know you called this meeting, but actually we're the ones holding the cards here. And then they give up New York essentially to these developers, to these banks, to these, the ultra wealthy. And for the most part, that's, the New York that we see today. That's really the US that we see today. And more the world that we're seeing today is just controlled by ultra wealthy oligarchs who very much have more power than our elected officials, whose hands are very much I don't want to say their hands are tied, but they're complicit, and they're gaining the benefits from this system in this way. And the point that he makes there that really struck me and I thought would be useful to bring up for this conversation is this idea that the decisions kind of become automatic because they're determined by these market forces, and when the decision making power has gone into such the realm of capital, what is it that we as citizens can actually do to make decisions? Like our ability to actually influence our own world, our own lives, becomes dramatically decreased because it's not really anymore about our, whether or not our city representatives have the same values as us, because ultimately they need funds to run their campaigns, and they need to shake hands with the right people, and they need to be utilizing the city's funds in certain ways to benefit economic growth, quote unquote, versus, the real felt economy that workers experience. And so it got me thinking that we're living in this system that is based on this very narrow view of control, that like, if everything can be seen through the bottom line, then control works itself out. Everything can be controlled through this economic system. But ultimately what we're seeing now is that just isn't true. That's a fantasy that these bankers are living in. We're seeing these uprisings in Minnesota and across, and really, all over the place, in Louisville, in New York, in LA. I'm sure I'm missing some, that, people are coming together in massive frustration and saying, that they feel like they do not have control over their own lives. And we're, I think, you've had Kalahi on here,
Yeah.
He talks about, I've had a couple exchanges with him on Twitter about, economics and this idea of externalities. The economics can't really incorporate what they call externalities, but what the rest of us just really call the real world. You can't put a human into an equation because humans are too complex to easily predict in that fashion. And right now we're seeing the outflows of a system in our country and in the world that is determined by equations and is determined by accruing a greater number, a higher number of capital. And we as humans, we don't fit into those equations. So we're seeing that outflow, like we talked last time, on the streets. Here are these people who don't fit into this equation of a market society. And the same thing goes for racism in this country and white supremacy, that the market pretends like those things can be ignored or they can go without being factored in. And those are the things that are really affecting people's lives. And so when that pressure mounts, we have these eruptions of people saying, no, we need more control because ultimately we're not feeling free. We're feeling, I'm reminded of this quote from this, I don't even know what you'd call him. I guess like a spiritualist, this from the 1800s, name's Gurdjieff. Who says, the first step in becoming free is to realize that you're in prison.
Ooh.
And I think that for, people of color in this country, and especially Black people, that's kind of a no-brainer, And I think for a lot of the white people in this country, as we saw in the protests in Michigan, for instance, storming Capitol Hill because they want haircuts and they've got rifles on their backs. They aren't really recognizing the extent of the prison that we're in. That folks are going to work today in unsafe environments because economies are quote unquote opening up in the midst of a deadly pandemic. And that's not because they have the choice. It's because they're being forced to do so. And, and the incentives are supposedly their wages, but really it's more so that the incentive is the whip of poverty, that if they can, if they do what their bosses and what their managers are demanding of them, and to some extent also the city and the state, then they won't be whipped by poverty, that they won't fall into just dire need like a lot of the folks that we see. So I think this question is really complex, and there's so many levels of it. There's, like you mentioned, like there's a personal sense of freedom or lack thereof when it comes to something like being addicted to a substance. That's such an individual way to see it. But then also, like, you imagine kids growing up in poverty, and then you have a whole family system that is like it's a prison, you know, and then you have whole communities that feel like open air prisons, that people can't get out of this cycle of poverty because they're not meant to. You know, this society is created for a narrow understanding of who's allowed to be free, and there's tons of communities that simply aren't included in that vision. And then I think to a really large extent, we have the entire working class is in this you know, I don't know if I'm overstating this, but to a large extent, the working class is in this economic prison where we are being forced to do labor that doesn't feel meaningful, labor that's deteriorating our environment, that's deteriorating our mental health, that's deteriorating, you know, our social benefit. And it's not because people want to, it's because these are the limited choices that we're offered in this market society. I just spoke for a long time. I don't know if you have any.
No. No, man. I'm sitting back and enjoying the conversation. There's a reason why I reached out to you, because you have a lot of things to say that it's kind of hard for me. I feel like I don't have the right words sometimes when trying to deal with this. I've been asking people at the facility I work at, because I do work with a lot of guys that were incarcerated at one point in time and were addicted to heavy drugs at one point in time, and asking them that same question: what does freedom look like? Everyone, the first thing they do is they just take a step back and go, whoa.
Yeah.
And the reason why that question just really had me thinking that, and I'll be totally honest and transparent. There's a couple kids that live in the facility. They're 5 and 4.
Yeah.
And it's a hotel room. They live in a hotel room around a bunch of drug addicts, hookers, pimps. And then there's people that are probably listening and say, yeah, that was like my neighborhood. It's like, no, this isn't a neighborhood. This is this is a lot smaller than whatever the hell most people had, because it's just a hotel room. And they have to deal with their family's addictions in a hotel room.
Yes. Yeah.
You got to grow up real fast. And I've been taking the kids out of the room. The mom lets me. The moms let me. And we just play board games. Color. We do it in the lobby. And they just can be kids for an hour or however long. For me, it's an escape. I'm back to being dad.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm just dad with these 2 kids, making sure they don't kill each other. And, you know, they're 2 little boys. And yesterday we were playing, and everyone that walked into the lobby to go get their dinner stopped and smiled and had something positive to say to these little boys.
Yeah.
These same people that complain every day about everything stopped and just grinned. And one guy stopped and said, "This is great." He just smiled. He just kept saying, "This is great. This is great." There was something somewhat freeing to them to see kids just be.
Yeah.
And that was real powerful. As I walked away from it, and someone kind of told me, you know, I'm in the moment. I'm just trying to make sure, you know, they don't lose pieces to the game. Someone ain't cheating and taking another turn. You know what I mean? I'm just being dad. And maybe it was the whole scene for everybody. Because as you hear people's stories, you hear these stories of, I got high with my mom the first time. I got high with my dad the first time. And that's why I blah, blah, and blah. And I'm like, whoa. Like that's denying your childhood right there.
Yeah.
When that's your reality. And then it came to the thing. It's like, okay, I'm dealing with these people that are so confined, in their minds by their situation. I don't know everyone's past, but we definitely have a lot of people of color. There are a few people that actually came from some status that lost a lot during the market crash, actually, in 2008. There's a few. They're definitely the minority.
Mm-hmm.
And I do, again, back to that imagery of that knee on the neck,
mm-hmm.
to what you said, to the working class. There is capitalism has a knee on our neck. We're constantly working to survive. And there's so many things that we just accept it is the way it is. I'm not going to have health care. I may not have shelter. Some of these people just accept the fact that you just don't have a house. A car is shelter. And it's like, how do you free that mind?
Yeah.
To see another way, to even understand another way, because it's so ingrained in you, especially when you live in these communities where there's policing by algorithm, right? And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, how do you get out of a mindset? Because one thing, we're trying to do, definitely I'm trying to do, is create community.
Yeah.
And I went and bought a coffee pot, because coffee is only served to the guests during breakfast. So I bought a coffee pot. I put it in the lobby, and I said, this is the community coffee pot. I bought y'all coffee for the first round. I bought y'all filters. If y'all want cream and sugar, you get cream and sugar. Y'all run out of coffee, you buy coffee. Y'all buy filters on your own. But this is y'all's coffee pot. Y'all want coffee? Here you go. You've been complaining about it. Here you go. But it's the community pot. About almost a week, it was great. Everybody was fired up. There was one woman that was like, I'll keep this area clean. Because that's what I asked. I said, please keep the area clean. She said, I'll keep the area clean, and I'll make coffee for people. She comes down in the morning. She cleans up the area. When cats come in, she's like, hey, y'all need coffee? Who wants some coffee? Great. Everybody's happy. People feel good. Somebody stole a coffee pot.
Damn.
And it's just like, Jesus.
Yeah, I want to answer this question pretty directly, but first I want to lay down some groundwork,
Sure.
So bring me back to it. If I if I end up somewhere else, bring me back to this. Exactly. I think it's really important. And as I understand it, the idea is like, how do we start to cultivate and create that freedom on the individual level in our own minds, which I think is really, that is the topic of, that the Buddha, speaks of. That is the topic that, like Jesus roves through Rome talking about, that MLK discusses, that Tupac discusses, that Gandhi discusses, that like freedom is something transcendent within the individual, that when the individual taps into it, it begins to reverberate and ripple into, a new way of being, a new life that starts to get really created in the world, And so I want to take it from this level, from a human development level, like each of us come into this world through a womb, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what that womb represents, what that womb is it's an environment that this fetus is growing in, right? And that environment has every bit of sustenance that fetus needs. It is a representation of complete safety, where this creature, inside this womb, is completely helpless, completely defensive, except for the fact that its environment is providing it with everything it needs. It has all of the fluids, all of the nutrients, all of the opportunity to grow and develop into an infant, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, all of that is dependent also on the collaboration of the mother, right? Of her taking care of herself and creating this environment, right? Mm-hmm. And as we come out of that womb, we're introduced into the world, and we start to learn about the world very slowly, and especially relative to other animals. Humans do this very slowly. Some animals come out of the womb walking, and and we don't do that, right? We are these defenseless creatures. And a big part of that is because this is just an evolutionary thing that has helped us cultivate these powerful brains. We have some of the most powerful brains on the planet. Probably one of the most complex things that we're aware of in the universe is the human brain. And this whole defenselessness is important for this brain to develop, because it has to slowly take in all of its surroundings and learn how to adapt. That's what makes humans such a dominant creature, is that we have such an ability to adapt to our environment, that and especially when we collectivize, right? So we can create cities, we can create communities that are more or less impenetrable to essentially any other creature except for humans. And so, but this all begins on a very intimate level. It begins in an intimate way between a mother and a father, or mother or father and their infant.
Mm-hmm.
And that infant is very slowly starting to learn what the world is. And at first, the only awareness they have is that they exist. And then they have this awareness of like existing and then painful existence, so they cry. And there's sort of like those two things. It's like pleasure and pain. And, if the infant's breastfeeding, then that's all this nourishment is in there, all this safety, all this love. And then when the infant is crying, it's all of this pain, right? And it starts to get more complex. And the more attuned the parents are to the infant, then the infant has more time to adapt to its world, adapt to the environment, and starts to learn, this environment is dependable. It's something that I can rely on. It's not all dangerous. It's not all misery, right? It's got some like laughter to it. It's got some love to it. But as we, everybody's not growing in the same kind of environment, right? Mm-hmm. So there is this, in psychology, there's this idea of adverse childhood events. And this is just basically saying bad shit that happens to you as a kid, right? And to some extent, I'm sure like all of us have faced some adversity, but really adverse childhood events is talking about sort of like significant traumas like neglect, abuse, those sorts of things, right? And what we see is that when those sorts of events happen in infancy, in childhood, even in adolescence to an extent, it creates a very strong imprint on our brains and in our minds of what we know about the world. So if somebody's experienced, abuse of any kind at that age, there's a real understanding the world is a dangerous place, that the world is something threatening. Where, somebody who doesn't have that experience in childhood is their experience is that the world is a lot more reliable, right? And so they treat it with like reliability, where a person with a significant history of trauma is responding to the world as if it's dangerous, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what we see of people on the streets is that adverse childhood events are inordinately represented among people on the streets. It's something like 68%, I believe, of people living on the streets have experienced childhood adversity in that way, where I think in the general population, it's much, much smaller. It's something, I want to say that it's something more like 20%, right? So what we're seeing is that actually these adverse childhood events, they're called ACEs, right? Adverse childhood events are linked with all sorts of negative life outcomes, from things to diabetes to heart disease to obesity to PTSD, depression, anxiety, just all sorts of negative health outcomes. And what we have right now is in the U.S., I'll just take that as an example, is that we have an environment, the U.S., which is quite hostile to people who do not fit within a normative standard of health. So if you have severe depression, if you have significant anxiety that prevents you from being able to, let's say, hold a job that pays your rent,
mm-hmm.
our society doesn't treat you as someone who needs more assistance. Our society treats you as somebody who you're not going to be able to pay your rent, and it's your fault. It's your fault for not working harder. It's your fault for not fitting in. It's your fault for not dealing with your own life as it is. And so the work that for instance, you're doing in this hotel is, you're creating an environment, and that environment has a lot of stuff in there that you don't have control over. It's got addicts, it's got people, and I'm going to guess most of the people living in that hotel probably have an adverse childhood event that is significantly impacting their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we do with that? Like, you can't undo an event, right? Like, that's happened. It's in the past. But what we can do is start to give people an experience of safety, that they can experience their world and their environment in a way that it is nourishing, that it's trustworthy, that it is something that if they fall, it's going to catch them. And that can only really be done in community, because we can't really just do it for people on an individual basis, right? You on your own, you're not going to be able to support every single person in that hotel room, in that hotel.
Mm-hmm.
But as a community starts to form, that hotel can start to be like its own little womb, where it has the nourishment and the safety that people can start to rely on each other, and they start to see, not only is this environment reliable, but I want to take care of this environment because it's doing something for me. We talked about like the folks at our facilities who they want to sweep the outside, not for payment, but just because they feel a sense of ownership and kinship to this place. And so as we start to cultivate that safety, people start to experience the world in a way that it's not threatening. It's not something they have to defend against, but it's somewhere where they can breathe freely, where they can experience that sense of safety and really start to encounter a sense of personal freedom. And that's where, that's where it has to start. It has to start on that individual level, or else it doesn't really stack up. It doesn't have the foundation to transform communities and societies the way that we need to.
Mm-hmm.
Is that making sense?
It makes a lot of sense, actually.
And
it makes all the sense, yeah.
We're seeing right now communities who are recognizing the lack of safety that they experience in the American system. And like you said, there's no clearer image of that than seeing a representative of the state having his knee on a defenseless person's neck as they slowly asphyxiate and they're begging for mercy. It is a hostile environment. And what's coming out of that is that people are feeling extremely defensive. People are feeling frustrated and angry, and they're saying, I can't depend on the state to protect me. And there's no recourse. These legislators are in the pockets of police unions. These DAs are complicit in the function of the police state. And so what recourse do they have left but to say this society is something that needs to get torn down? And the only way that sort of destructive reality is going to get slowed or prevented or transformed in a more peaceful way is that the violators, the people who are perpetrating the massive state violence, are going to have to start to reckon with their complicitness in this system. And that seems to be something that seems to be a real, like a real impasse. It seems to me, at least, like a real riddle of how do we start to get the people in power to recognize the amount of violence that they are perpetrating and the amount of misery that they are perpetuating. And I'm really giving them the benefit of the doubt, suggesting that maybe they don't know. And that's something that, if people disagreed with, I think it would be totally fair.
To your point, I kind of wonder because it's such a part of the system that I don't think they understand. Maybe they. When you look at these numbers, I know a lot of people are putting it out on social media, like the billionaire class. I call them the gilded class, have made $400 and some billion during this pandemic.
Yeah.
Boeing, who got a huge bailout with the first CARES Act stimulus. It's called the stimulus. The first stimulus is going to fire like 7,000 to 12,000 people.
Yeah.
Citing all these losses. And it's interesting that, these are the people that are really doing the looting.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that. Yeah.
And we're not calling it out. Wage theft is a real thing. I know so many people that will take a job, as we call it now, a gig. And I have a lot of friends actually down in your neck of the woods that do the same kind of work. It's like promotional marketing bullshit. LA is filled with it.
Yep.
Maybe you've even done it at one point in your life where you make like $20, $25 an hour to wear a t-shirt and hand some crap out or whatever. Right. And a lot of those jobs don't pay overtime.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of them, but a lot do. So they have day rates.
Yeah, how many teachers do we see driving Uber,
So many.
Yeah, it's incredible. No, I'm so glad that you framed it that way. I mean, it's so important, I feel like, in the conversation, I think especially, and I don't know, maybe I'm being optimistic and sort of suggesting that there is a conversation to be had with with this culture of white supremacy. But, I was in a conversation with a professor the other day who said, the moment that people start looting, the protesters lose credibility.
The moral high ground, as Tucker Carlson called it, I think.
Right, exactly. And so I and that might be true, I guess, in the sense of like a media narrative, but it's just surprising how the police force can use violence nonstop and somehow never loses its credibility. It's incredible how much looting happens at the corporate level, with millions and billions and even trillions of dollars, and somehow never lose credibility.
We reward them.
Absolutely.
Steve Mnuchin got a government job from it.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean the entrenched nature of these narratives is something very remarkable, and I keep coming back. It's almost like podcast is going to be a hyper-normalization podcast, because I keep coming back to this idea that really we're so steeped in this culture that it's the water, we're the fish in the water. We don't have any sense of its existence, and realizing that there's something beyond it. There's a sense right now, I sometimes am reminded of sort of my very conservative evangelical upbringing, and that idea of like the end of the world,
Mm-hmm.
and I wonder if it's just because we don't have an imagination beyond this system, that as it crumbles and it loses its credibility, and it clearly becomes more destable and incapable of managing the well-being of the citizens, that it feels like the end of the world, because we don't know what's on the other side, but
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
No, I think we've also been sold this bill of goods about the evils of communism and socialism.
Yes.
That it's just state repression. And the irony is, here we are in this capitalist country with a president that is the epitome of capital. He is John Galt personified for the Ayn Rand libertarian fans out there.
Yeah.
And he wants to literally put a ban on free speech.
Yes.
In the business sector, right? Twitter, how dare you police what I say? They didn't really police it that hard. I want you banned. I want to be able to say what I want to say, and I'm going to put the full force of the government in so I can say what I want to say on social media. All the while, hundreds of thousands of people are dying in this country. I don't really care.
Yeah.
It's frightening.
Absolutely. And I think coming to this idea of freedom, like, it is very concerning how it seems that white, there's that the quote of like, for people of privilege, equality feels like oppression.
Yes.
And that seems it's really speaking to something I think deeply true, where, you have this very entitled white president talking about his freedom of speech being impinged on. And meanwhile, the narratives that are being completely ignored in communities that are suffering from poverty and inequality, there's this sense that somehow they've deserved that, or they've earned that, and it reminds me on a sort of like twisted level how privilege itself is a prison. Privilege itself is something that the moment that you have it, you can't let it go. That it's something that you have to hold on to for dear life, because what would it look like if you didn't have this privilege? Of course, it's a lot easier to live with privilege than the prison of poverty, or the prison of being a marginalized citizen. But there's still this. I guess I'm speaking to this idea of like, I can't tell if these people understand or not, because their privilege is so blinding. It's like the walls of this prison that they cannot see the other side of. And then
I agree with you.
That's not to feel sorry for them. It's just more so to say, maybe if we started looking at it like breaking each other out of prison.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's just confounding, I think, the times that we're in, and I guess maybe how explicit all of these underlying things are becoming is enlightening. It's very revealing, and it's creates a lot of uncertainty for me. How are you feeling about it?
The one thing I don't dig about it, and maybe this is because I went down a rabbit hole earlier this year or last year, watching a lot of documentaries about LA and the riots. And there's a really good one, and I can't remember because I get them so confused. There's a really good one that goes back, I want to say 10, 15 years before the LA riots even started. And that one really does a good job of putting everything into a real good context, right? A historical context of this didn't happen over one thing. It didn't even happen over two things. It was a lot of things. Like, no, I think, is that the same? I'm trying to remember. There's one that goes like all the way back to like that migration of Black people even coming to Los Angeles, and especially South Central Los Angeles, because that's where all those, like the Goodyear factory was there, and there was like shipping jobs there. So through that, you're building this like Black middle class, and what happens with that middle class starts to slowly disintegrate, you know, and then kind of showing you, okay, this is what you get. Kind of like our conversation last time, is austerity and neoliberalism, is homelessness the end result? Mm-hmm. And when we see these riots, and there's the people on the left that are like, you know, uprising, and this is great, and they want to show pictures of the police station burning up, and like, I get it, I totally get it. I had Alex Vitale on the show.
Yeah, I listened to part of that episode. It was great.
You know, he wrote the book, The End of Policing. But you're also talking about like people in that world, like Ruth Gilmore, who's a prison abolitionist, Angela Davis. When they say that word, it's not as simple as we just want to close all prisons. Like it's a process, and there's a lot more involved. So they actually have a list of demands.
Yeah.
And there's a difference between, if anyone understands the frustration, I understand the frustration. Yeah. That being said, what do you do tomorrow if instead of the mayor saying, we're going to look into this and we're going to get a panel and we're going to investigate and all that other bullshit? What if the mayor says, all right, what do y'all want?
Yeah. And
what if the cry back is, arrest those guys? All right, they're arrested. What do y'all want? That it?
Yeah.
Prosecute them to the full extent of the law? Okay, they're prosecuted to the full extent of the law. That it?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I'm really connecting here with what you're saying, because I think that, and it's great the way you put it. Also, these prison abolitionists, you know, there's a list of demands, and it's not just about, oh, let's close the prisons tomorrow, but it is. I had this conversation actually yesterday again with a professor about, he was kind of criticizing the idea of abolishing the police or abolishing prisons, and he's like, you know, so what? We're just going to close these things. We're just going to get rid of them. And, you know, my thought is it seems so drastic and so unrealistic because we are not practiced in imagining a society without those things.
Yep.
And when we start to imagine them, and we start to create those things in our minds, and we start to create those things between each other and try to realize them, we'll realize that it's very, very complicated. But that's not a problem. That's a good thing, because we're going to have to start changing our states of mind to exist in a culture and in a place where police are not needed, where prisons are not needed. And we won't be able to do that in the same way that we've existed under this capitalist regime and under this capitalist society. So you know, it makes me think of what I was saying earlier of you know, when we start to learn what our environments look like, that the person who has suffered from an adverse childhood event and then you know, grows up in that kind of environment, they are not well suited for a society that is accepting of them, because all they have learned is to see themselves as unacceptable, to see a world that hates them, a world that is threatening to them. And so it really requires sort of a deprogramming of that mindset of you don't need to always be defensive, that I'm here for you, that there is safety in this place. and as we start to create a real sense of safety, felt experience of safety, then we can start to imagine, what does it look like to create communities, societies, cities, countries based on that felt experience of freedom and safety. And I think, certainly in the moments where I feel safe, in the moments where I have a grasp on a sense of psychic freedom, if I were to imagine the world I want to live in and the world that cultivates that in people, it doesn't include places like the carceral state. It doesn't include prisons. It includes things like, if you have a drug problem, that there are people in your community there to help catch you, that they're there to not shame you for the circumstances that you're in, but to say, hey, tell me about it. I want to understand you. I want to see things from your perspective, and I want to let you know that you're safe here, and that I understand that your drug problem is a coping mechanism, and let's see what you're coping with, and let's see if there's a way that that you don't feel the need to rely on this in that way. Yeah, I think that it's really important. I sort of oscillate in my mind between this like very individual sense and sort of a macro sense. And it's all the in-between shit that I'm always, trying to suss out and figure out how they come together. But I'm just thinking about like sort of the protests that are going on here in LA. 2 days ago, there was a big protest where protesters were able to shut down the highway.
I saw that.
A massive show of community power. And there was, I think, one, maybe two people who ended up, bashing the windows of police cars.
I saw that too.
And then and then right away, what you see on the news, the tickers at the bottom are framing it as a riot and framing it as violent protesters. But the vast majority of the people out there demonstrating were protesting peacefully. And what we had was just a couple of people who are activated by their sense, their lack of power, their lack of control over their own lives, and those narratives end up dominating the news cycle because, I don't know, I guess because it's sexier, because it plays into the sort of white supremacist narrative. And I think that if we're going to take care of each other and we're going to build a new society outside of this capitalist enforcement and this carceral state, we're going to have to pull each other in. And that person who's throwing the skateboard through the back of the patrol car, it's not to shame that person for being violent, but it's to embrace that person and say, I feel your suffering. I am suffering with you. And we can build a better place than what a better world than what this violent police state is. But it won't be through the same mechanisms that the police use, which is violence, which is oppression, which is marginalization and literal murder. If we start to look a lot like the police, what hope do we have for building something better?
No, I'm with you. I saw, we were watching some of the LA stuff at work yesterday. Actually, it was somebody posted on Twitter where they had shut down the freeway, and then I guess a cop car. I saw the kid try to he hit the cop car with the skateboard, and the cop car like ran over a couple people.
Yeah, the cop car was pushing through the protesters, and somebody else got on the hood, and as the cop car sped off, the person tries to get off and slams their head into the street. And that went more or less ignored on the news. The on Twitter, everybody's saying, look, this police car just almost killed somebody.
I saw that. It's crazy.
And we're complaining about the damage done to the police car, where it's real flesh and blood human beings who are out there demonstrating for a better community, a better society. And all that sort of the narrative that comes out of it is a threat to public order. And I think what goes so underrepresented is that public order comes at the cost of Black, brown, and working class lives. And the folks that we engage with who are unhoused, they're the cost of public order.
God, yes.
And it just goes completely ignored.
It's interesting as we think about the police and how we view them, because for a lot of people, you grow up as a child, and the teacher tells you police are your friend if you're ever lost, and you see a police officer, that person's going to help you. And in my community, it's kind of the NWA, F the police. Yeah. It's kind of is the sentiment that resonated a little bit more with me, because that's, what you deal with, right? Yeah. I'm their enemy. Mm-hmm. On GP, I am their enemy. And I think that's what a lot of Black people deal with. And that to me is another kind of freedom, right? I don't get that same freedom to be able to just be in front of law enforcement. I have to tone myself down. I have to obey, because depending on who you're dealing with, if they're in the middle of a power trip, just because, you can get fucked up.
Absolutely.
And we keep seeing it on TV. I told Shahid Buttar and Alex Vitale, I was like, to me, a police body cam is a selfie stick.
Yeah. It's not deterring crimes.
No, they do what they want to do, because they know that Black or brown body, people are automatically going to say, what did he do? And that's a problem. Mm-hmm. That woman in Central Park that felt so empowered to call the police because dude wanted her to put her dog on a leash. And, she was going to call the cops on him and show him, like, ha, 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 I'll show you. And I'm going to act real frightened right now. Mm-hmm. And where I don't agree with putting her public information out there and getting her fired from her job, I thought that was kind of petty bullshit. She's fired from her job. All right, awesome. Now what? Racism went away? She learned a lesson? Fucking lesson did she learn?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned, I'm just like oscillating between all these things because, I certainly don't want to condone violence and protesting. I don't necessarily want to condone doxing people or whatever. I also don't want to villainize the folks who are taking power in the ways that they see possible,
Yeah.
And I think that right now, the conversation that you've brought up is so important of this, like, what is freedom? How do we capture that for ourselves is so important now in the midst of all of this societal unrest. I think it's crucially important right now, because these are the moments where if we can tap in to recognizing ourselves as free beings, regardless of the oppression that other people want to impose on us, if we can sustain that into the other side, then we'll have created a new society, if that makes sense. That's the beginning of something new. I'm just thinking about, the times that I've been involved in direct action. There is a real temptation to get swept up in the energy.
Of course.
And things, the crowd is chanting and people are, shaming the police, and people are and you feel connected. You feel connected to a community of people who are there to protect, for the specific direct action I'm thinking about was to protect the unhoused folks here in Echo Park. And it's easy to get swept up in it. And I remember thinking, I need to be extremely conscious in this moment. I need to be extremely conscious that every move I make, every chant that I participate in is reverberating the peace and the that new world that we're trying to enact. Because if I get in the face of a police officer and I start cursing them out or whatever, it's going to feel good for me. But ultimately, the people who are going to incur the violence from that are the unhoused folks in the park. And it's not worth it for me to just get in the face of somebody just to expel that energy while other people are going to be taking the brunt of it. I think is very narrow-minded. It's short-sighted. And what we need is communities coming together. And it's hard. It's really hard to even give any sort of like real advice on this, because, I'm thinking about MLK, and people kind of like valorized the quote unquote peaceful protests that happened in the civil rights movement. But really, they were violent protests. The difference is that they were incurring violence. They were having violence done to them.
Yeah.
And it becomes very hard to say, well, we just need to be out there. We need to be taking the hits, taking the violence, especially when the communities are already taking so much violence.
Took so many hits, and you've seen those hits be taken for so long.
Yeah.
For me, it's this whole thing, and I hate to cut you off. I'm sorry.
I'm
just going to get this thought out. There's this lack of class solidarity that I see in a lot of protests. I can't even remember what it was for, but before this whole shutdown happened, I remember driving on the 580 freeway here in Oakland, California, and on the opposite side of me, the eastbound side of me, they had shut down the freeway. I want to say it might have been in solidarity with someone that got killed by the police. I can't remember off the top of my head what it was for, but the freeway got shut down, and no one that shut down the freeway looked like me. And they were high-fiving each other. And the people that are stuck in traffic trying to get to where they need to go definitely are getting pissed off. And I thought to myself, okay, depending on what I can't remember exactly what it was for. I get it to a degree, but watching the protests in Chile, where the students were letting people through the subway cars during rush hour, that's a hell of a way to build class solidarity.
Yeah.
We're letting the working class in for free.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a different conversation on that train when you're going to work, opposed to the Extinction Rebellion people that glued themselves to the subway cars in the UK during rush hour and prevented people to go to work. It was around the same time. I think sometimes when we see these things happen, and again, this is just my opinion, I feel like there's a certain privilege to certain people that protest. Not everybody. Mm-hmm. But some people out there, it's like, hey, you get to do this. You get to take off work.
Yeah. And
shut down the freeway and stop all these other people from going to work. Like, sometimes that turns off a lot of people that would be for the cause.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I definitely understand what you're saying. I just like, yeah, I mean, I want to hop on board at the same time. I have such a hard time criticizing anybody who's doing work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
it's I think right now, but I just feel like the revolution, the uprisings, the idea of instituting a world beyond this capitalist state, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen in a day. Like you said, if we had demands that are going to be followed by our city officials, our federal officials, what are we going to ask? I think we have a lot of building left to do in that department. And so I feel like right now we need to, or I should say, I want to stay on my toes. I want to be conscious of what is happening. And I want to let that awakened state, that transcendent state of freedom, look down on our circumstances and not get swept up in it, and not get swept up in my identity as an advocate, or my identity as having a class solidarity, which I think is so important, but not diminishing myself to that state, and realizing that there's another level of understanding myself, that I am a human being, and whether we like it or not, the police officer with the baton and the shield is a human being as well. And there's a level of human solidarity that isn't to say that we can't have conflict, and that we can't find ourselves on the opposite sides of issues, and maybe on the opposite sides of having violence incurred on us. But it's to say that I have to recognize this person is responding to an environment that has programmed them. I don't see a lot of wealthy people becoming police officers. I don't see the Harvard grads. I don't see Ivy League folks graduating with 4-year degrees from Yale or Columbia and then saying, I want to be a police officer. And that's because it is a function to divide the working class, and that's a hard pill for me to swallow, because when we're watching a video of a white police officer having his knee on a black person who's being arrested and murdering him in the street, it gets very easy to lose that respect for this person, but I have to start. I mean, I think we talked about this a little bit last time, but I think it's so important to recognize that our oppression and our freedom is wrapped up in one another. I suffer a lot in this city, seeing the outflows of capitalism. I'm not living on the streets, but I know that I am unwell because my neighbors on the streets are unwell. And and I have to be open to experiencing that suffering and feeling that sense of powerlessness, to really tap into the reality of this situation. And that's something that I don't think that we always let ourselves do enough. I think we get caught up in our suffering, and we are blinded by the rage that it causes. And I think it's really important to get to a point of feeling completely powerless, and realizing that when you get to that point, there's nothing anybody can take from you. And then you are really free. And then you can start to rebuild your activity in the world in a way of every relationship that you have, every organization that you are a part of is building power, if that makes sense. I don't know. I might be getting a little abstract here.
No, I think this conversation definitely calls for a certain level of abstraction. I don't think it's as simple as, like you said initially. I asked you the question in kind of an abstract way. I didn't pinpoint exactly what kind of freedom I was talking about because I knew you were going to be able to like truly expound on this for me. It's even got me thinking of different things.
There's a level of power that is
mm-hmm.
tempting to have. Power is seductive, and when that power is built in equality and it's built with one another in collaboration, that's building equality. That's building power, a mutual sense of power, and I think the danger becomes when we want power over another person, where our power puts us in a standing above or in control of the other. And it doesn't matter who the other is. For a lot of these police officers, the other is folks who live in these neighborhoods.
Of course.
It's and for the folks in those neighborhoods, the other is that police officer, right? And I think that there's a real I hate how sometimes these stories get glorified about like MLK and Gandhi as if it's so easy to just be peaceful. So I don't want to say that. I don't want to say that like everybody needs to be doing it this way. I'm just saying let's recognize for a moment how much power these individuals and the movements that really supported them, the people who came up with them, were able to build by identifying with the powerlessness rather than reacting against their powerlessness. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Because also too, like the way when you think about the way we view Gandhi and MLK today with a 2020 lens, especially with their quote unquote nonviolence, mm-hmm. We forget that the last big march MLK had, a riot broke out.
Yeah.
The I am a man, you see the people holding those signs. There's 2 marches he had like that. And the one march they're holding signs with sticks. And there was people that took the signs off the sticks and started like busting out windows with those sticks. And it effed him up in his head. He's like, dude, this is not how this was supposed to go down. And he ended up going back there and they made some changes logistically with the signs. And then he gives that great speech the night before he dies. But when I think about the way those guys are looked at and their movements, and then I think about 1992. And how do we look at 1992? We see a smoldering city. We see Reginald Denny. And we see Korean store owners with firearms protecting their stores from the quote unquote savages. That's how we see LA in 92. And we forget all the other riots in the 60s that were jumping off, mm-hmm. that you really could put MLK's face on.
Right.
Because he definitely was there, talking about it. And I find that so interesting about how narratives change now, especially because there's no real leader
right.
that stands out front of these movements that has concrete demands. Mm-hmm. Because these movements sit around like the war on poverty. Reverend, what is his name? I can't think of his name right now. Yes. I'm mad he's not a bigger figure because he has concrete demands.
Yeah.
And every time he speaks about the frustration of poor people, every time he speaks with that class solidarity rhetoric, I'm like, I get it. Mm-hmm. I get it. I love you, man. I wish that you were out. I mean, and he does do a lot of press. I think he does as much press as he possibly can to get his message out there. It's just, maybe that's on purpose.
I mean, I get the sense he's in it for the long haul. He's not.
Oh yeah.
He's not just looking at, the 2020 election, the 2024 election,
He's not Al Sharpton.
Mm-hmm. Right.
He is the antithesis to Al Sharpton.
I wanted to say what you were just talking about with MLK and how these narratives shift, I think is so important, because I think it's crucial that we not see what's going on right now as independent or removed from what happened in 1992 or what's going on in the civil rights movement in the 60s. This is one movement. That these are the ripple effects of those things that have gone on in the past, and so in some ways I think that what's going on in Minneapolis, you could put MLK's face on that too, and there is. I want to go back for a second about my discomfort about trying to glorify the peaceful way too much, because I think what my discomfort is that it's not that I disagree with it. It's that I think the mantle of taking on that nonviolence peace approach is that the moment that you do that, what you are doing is also giving up your life. We can't forget that MLK was murdered, that Gandhi was murdered, that like the moment that becomes our approach, what we are saying is that that our lives are on the chopping block, that we're going to incur violence. And I don't think that I have the authority to tell people to say that, to do that, and that is what is so infuriating to me about sort of the white mentality of looking at quote unquote looters and shaming them for not being peaceful protesters, because I don't think they really understand what all of these peaceful protesters are actually doing. They're putting their actual goddamn lives on the line. These folks standing in front of the patrol car the other day are saying, if you're going to run me over, then you're going to run me over, and that almost happened.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm in full support of those folks. I just also feel a certain amount of discomfort of saying, well, we got to do it the way MLK did. We got to do it the way Gandhi did, because, I'm just thinking about all those pictures of the dogs just unleashed on these folks on the bridge, like it is a demand for people to put their lives on the line. And that may very well be what it costs for liberation. And in some sense, I think that liberation and putting your life on the line are one and the same. That you're saying, I would rather be in liberation, in freedom, than to exist under in submission and servitude and servility. So I don't know. I just felt the need to sort of say that, because I do think these are important figures. I think it's a necessary way for us to combat what's going on in our society, but it is also a deeply vulnerable, scary place to be, because you're putting your life down. And when I want to come back to the folks in your motel, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is the experience that they're having when they have that soft spot, when they hit that, if you have the addicted person looking at those two little kids and being able to smile at them, they are, for that moment, putting down that facade of being independent and hardcore and not needing anybody else, and they're communing with those kids, and it, in a very real sense, is a great amount of vulnerability. They're recognizing someone in themselves that they haven't seen for years. The person who can look over and have a a moment of vulnerability and kindness without feeling afraid and terrified that that their trauma is going to be incurred once again. Does that make sense?
That makes all the sense. That makes all the sense.
Yeah, I mean, we look at like it's just, you know, like I'm thinking. I've been listening to this podcast called Dissect, and it's about, you know, the Kendrick Lamar album "To Pimp a Butterfly."
Okay.
And you know, I'm just hearing all this inspiration behind this album, and I'm just thinking about how, you know, to ask somebody to give up their life in a gang in that culture, they're completely vulnerable. Who is there to protect them? Who is there to catch them if not, you know, their brothers in their gang, you know? And I don't think that if you're not seeing things from that level, you're not recognizing how much it costs to give up defensiveness, how much it costs to give up a hard way of life, because being hard is the only way to get through it, you know?
Yeah.
So I just see sort of these like revolutions on all these multiple levels. Like the person who can sit down and actually, like, you know, the next step for you is like, how do you get people to start playing the board games with you and the kids, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the cost that it takes for somebody to be able to do that when they haven't played a board game in 20 years and that board game reminds them of like getting the shit kicked out of them or whatever it is, like it's a real cost to their identity, to their sense of being. And it's a real vulnerable moment of humanity, and softness that sometimes we're not allowed to express in this world, especially if you're oppressed.
I don't know if this is maybe you can explain to me better what because I don't know sometimes what I'm trying to do. I don't have a degree in psychotherapy. I am a junior college dropout. So I'm playing with the kids, and you know, everybody wants to win, and they're not cheating by any stretch of the imagination, but they're definitely competitive with one another, which is fine.
Uh-huh.
And we're doing a best 2 out of 3 on this game. It's like Connect 4, but it's got you can shoot the pieces onto the board. You like launch them.
Okay.
You know, we get these games donated, so I don't know, it is what it is. So the kids are having a ball. They're launching the pieces, and at this point now, I'm telling them when they launch them all crazy, you got to pick it up. So now they're not trying to launch them crazy. They're literally trying to win this game, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to figure out how they can aim it a certain way to get it in the thing to win. And the younger kid beats the older kid 2 games to 1. It's all over. I got to take him back home. And I said, okay, you're the champion. And they're like, well, what is champion? I said, well, you're the winner. You won twice, and you've proven that you are the best today. And I said, what do you want to eat? What is your winner's meal? And he's like, chicken nuggets. And I was like, if I go get you chicken nuggets and fries, would that make you happy? He's like, yeah. He's like, you gonna share? He's like, yeah. And so he asked the other kid, chicken nuggets? Like he's asking him, like, are we going to share these nuggets? Like, this sounds like a great thing. We played this game. I guess I'm the winner. And we're going to share some nuggets. Because ultimately I'm trying to show, like, you know, you have to have some sort of, be humble when you win.
Uh-huh.
And share the spoils of victory and all this other stuff that I'm trying to instill in 4 or 5-year-olds.
But that's when it happens, you know? That's when we learn those lessons, is like at that age is when these, you know, that's where a capitalist has grown, you know?
Yeah.
A socialist has grown when they're 4, 5, 6, you know, like these ages. That's why I wanted to start all the way back in the womb, is these lessons come to us from the moment that we get into this world of my dad was in the military. My dad was in the special forces. So I had a sense of military intervention, and the realities of war were something present from the moment that I was in my household, So, and these kids, the same thing, they're living in a motel room right now. They're learning something about the world. Is that motel room going to be a place, a respite from outside? Is that, are these games going to be something that pits them against each other, or is it something where they get to win something and share it with each other? Like, these are those lessons reverberate into adulthood and into our society as a whole. I think I interrupted you though. Keep going.
No. That's ultimately what I'm trying to show them. Is like you can win, quote unquote, but it's sharing that makes everybody happy.
Yeah.
Now you can share with your moms, and you can share with your grandma, because there's like 5 of them in the room, and like you can share with all the people in the room.
Yeah. And
everybody's happier when everybody gets some.
Absolutely. Right.
You hope that's what they learn. This has got to, I can't do it one time and think that sticks. It's got to be, I'm going there in a few hours, and then it'll be another game that we play, and then I'll have to go get another treat, and we'll have to figure out how we're going to share it. And you hope they get it. We'll see.
Yeah. I feel like I hear just a lot of responsibility on your end for the folks that you're working with. And I think that that's just so amazing. I think that I hope that you feel like I hope that you recognize the power that playing a little board game has over some 4 and 5-year-old kids, because that is in some ways preemptive healing, like maybe not even preemptive. I don't know what these kids' life is like, It's a sense of having somebody who cares for them is healing. It's the thing that cauterizes those wounds and lets people start to imagine themselves as worthy of those things, So I don't know. I feel very, very moved by what you're doing with the folks you're working with. And I feel also like you're very lucky for it.
It does. It helps me. I think I told you that I don't live with my girlfriend and my child because of where I'm working. So I don't get to see my own son. Yeah. He called me yesterday because I guess he woke up, calling out for me. And that's rough.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to lie and say these kids aren't a surrogate for me not being around my own young son. But it also, I've been a dad since I was 21 years old.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of my adult life, I've been responsible for somebody else. And I haven't been great at it for a long time. You know what I mean? I've made a lot of mistakes and done things that I definitely regret. As a dad, you yell too much. You might even hit too much. And now at 42 years old, I'm just a little more calm, and I have a better understanding for the world. So when I see these little kids that are just stuck in a room with addicts, it's like, come on, man, let's go be kids.
Yeah.
I was stuck in a room in an apartment with an addict at one point in my life. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's like, I always had outside. And what happens when, as a child, you don't even have outside?
Yeah.
So I'm learning that creating that outside is giving everyone there an outside.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that doing that gives me an inside to them so we can build a bit of a community. Because this thing isn't going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that right now, like, this pandemic is a revolution. You know, it's not one that we've had the opportunity to control or incite, but it's going to change things massively. And I think that idea of like creating the outside, you know, when we start to like imagine, you know, it's dawning on me that like that imagination that you're taking on right now is happening because you're interacting with these kids, you know, and those are the voices inside of us that we had to shut down a long time ago. We had to shut down our child voices because you got to grow the fuck up. You got to get a job. You need to take some responsibility. You need to put food on the table, whatever the case is. And those are the voices that hold the keys to a new world, a world where we can start to imagine something that looks a lot more like, you know, winning chicken nuggets and sharing it with each other. You know, like that's the world, you know, that we need, is one where, you know, Jeff Bezos making $2 trillion means that we all get $2 trillion to share, not one where those benefits are reaped, you know, over the heads of the marginalized.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm also, you know, I'm somewhat aware that I'm grasping for straws of optimism, you know, in the midst of everything going on, and and none of it's easy. You know, I think just hearing like the situation that you know you can't be with your girlfriend and your kid because of the situation sounds so fucking hard, you know? And then at the same time I'm seeing like, damn dude, like you're taking all that energy and you're putting it somewhere for people who haven't felt that sort of compassion in a long time. And so, yeah, I don't know. I feel very blessed to have this conversation with you, to be honest.
No, man, I love our conversations. We have to do this more consistently.
Absolutely. I'm glad to whenever.
I'm talking like maybe we have to do this in a bi-weekly type thing if you have the time, man, because it's therapeutic for me. I'm not gonna lie. I'm sitting here a little bit misty-eyed. That's what you did to me. So I hope that the people out there that are going to listen to this enjoy this conversation. Is there anything you want to plug or anything you want me to link on this episode?
You know, I'm not a representative of these things, but I do, you know, I hope that anybody listening could check out Black Lives Matter LA and K-Town for All, and Street Watch LA, because they're just doing a lot of organizing work in our community, and are, you know, I think, you know, right now on Twitter, I've just been trying to press this idea that like what happened in Minnesota, in Minneapolis with George Floyd, that is happening here in LA. And these organizers are well aware of that. And they are pressing against the mayor, they're pressing against City Hall to stop giving the police over half of our city budget, you know? And so yeah, I just want to plug some support for those folks, those organizers who honestly are just doing a tremendous job, and I'm just very, very gracious to take part of it.
Well, thank you very much, Kelvin. Don't hang up. I'm going to play some music, and we're out.
guys for checking that out. This is another episode of Soundwaves. Thank you so much, Kelvin, for coming on the show and enlightening us, enlightening me. If you guys can become patrons, we have extra content for a lot of these shows right now. With the lockdown, we're giving out most of this content for free. There is a lot from the past shows. That's some amazing conversations. We have some actually live music concerts. We also have really awesome Bitter Lake merchandise that you get if you can become a patron. Also, like, share, and subscribe if you can. You see us on YouTube, SoundCloud, Podbean. What's the other one? Spotify. Subscribe, get the updates, comment, engage. We definitely like seeing what people have to say about the episodes. So thank you guys once again. And here is some more original music. And we're out.